Side B, Be Still. Number 1 on our WNYG Top 14 Songs for last month. Don't forget, listen in to 5 p.m. while he's got the update for this month. In the meantime, stay near. It's 3 o'clock, WNYG, Babylon.
The following program is a paid program. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the host and guests, and not necessarily the views of staff and management of WNYG.
Iron Sharpens Iron, sponsored in parts by Buttafuoco and Associates.
Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron, the only daily live broadcast in the New York metropolitan and greater Long Island area, on which pastors, Christian scholars, and theologians have a platform to address the burning issues facing the church and the world today. Proverbs 27:17 tells us, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Matthew Henry said that in this passage, we are cautioned to take heed whom we converse with and directed to have in view in conversation to make one another wiser and better. It is our hope that this goal will be accomplished over the next hour, and we hope to hear from you, the listener, with your own questions. And now, here's our host, Chris Arnzen.
Good afternoon, Long Island, New York, Connecticut, and those listening internationally over the internet. This is Chris Arnzen, your host of Iron Sharpens Iron. Our guest today is one of my favorite guests, Dr. Eric Svendsen, who is an evangelical Protestant apologist, in addition to being the founder and director of New Testament Research Ministries. He is an author, debater, and we are discussing his book, his groundbreaking 334-page work titled, Who is My Mother? The Role and Status of Mary in the New Testament and Roman Catholicism. If you'd like to join us on the air with a question about Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, our number is 631-321-WNYG. 631-321-WNYG. We look forward to hearing from you, whether you are an evangelical or a Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox or Jewish or Muslim or atheist, agnostic, whatever you happen to be. We look forward to hearing from you. And I can assure you, no matter how much you may disagree with these statements of our guest, Eric Svendsen, you will be treated with the utmost respect if you call in. And as always, you may remain anonymous if it makes you feel more comfortable. Our number is 631-321-WNYG, 631-321-WNYG. Want to pick up the phone during the station break? Call your family, friends, and loved ones and have them tune into the program, especially perhaps if they're Roman Catholic. They can hear the program at 1440 a.m. on the dial if they live on Long Island, the Bronx, Yonkers, the Jersey Shore, or the coast of Connecticut. But they can hear the program anywhere on the planet Earth via live streaming at WNYGSpiritofNY.com. That's WNYGSpiritofNY.com. And they can also hear the program live at the Iron Sharpens Iron website, sharpens.org, SHARPENS.org. We look forward to hearing from you and your questions for Eric Svendsen on his groundbreaking work, Who is My Mother? The Role and Status of Mary in the New Testament and Roman Catholicism, after these messages, so don't go away.
Construction sites are dangerous places. Construction is going on everywhere in New York. Many construction workers, electricians, and other trades are seriously injured from falls at construction sites. This is Dan Buttafuoco, your personal injury lawyer. What happens when a construction worker falls off a ladder or a scaffold and is seriously hurt or even killed? How does the family pay bills? This is serious. Fortunately, there are laws designed to protect all the trades from accidents at construction sites. These safety laws are known as the labor law, and they provide full compensation for injured workers. If you or someone you know has been injured during any type of construction, please call Buttafuoco & Associates at 1-800-669-HURT. At Buttafuoco & Associates, our labor law cases are cited in court and printed in legal publications. Buttafuoco & Associates, 1-800-669-HURT. We'll come to you anywhere in New York State. Wherever there's construction, there are serious injuries. Serious injuries require serious representation. Call Buttafuoco & Associates, 1-800-669-HURT for free advice. We help construction workers rebuild their lives.
WNYG, the spirit of New York.
Welcome back. This is Chris Arnzen. If you've just tuned us in, our guest today is Eric Svendsen, the founder and director of New Testament Research Ministries. Today we are discussing his book, Who is My Mother? The Role and Status of Mary in the New Testament and Roman Catholicism. It's great to have you back on Iron Sharpens Iron, Eric Svendsen.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Before we even go into the book, Who is My Mother, I'd like you to describe for our listeners New Testament Research Ministries.
New Testament Research Ministries is a website that is dedicated to not only New Testament studies, but also apologetics. We have a webpage that's completely devoted to Roman Catholic issues as well. We also have a blog called Real Clear Theology blog that I contribute to on and off. Sometimes it's several days in a row. Sometimes it's several months before I get to it, but it's still active.
And give us a list of some of the other books that you've written that can be found at that site.
Well, Evangelical Answers is the first book that I wrote a number of years ago, probably over a decade ago now. Upon This Slippery Rock, also available through Calvary Press. Have a number of other books. Actually, I have several e-books that are available through BibleSoft, the BibleSoft package, as well as my church website. So those are available as free downloads there.
Now, this subject that we are going to tackle today, the Mother of Jesus Christ, is probably one of the most sensitive issues that is a focal point in the Protestant-Catholic divide, if you will. You have to be, it seems to be, in this day and age, especially of political correctness, you have to be very, very careful about addressing this issue because of the sensitivity involved on the part of Roman Catholics. Why did you write this book to begin with, Eric?
Well, I'll answer that. Before I do, Chris, I can barely hear you, and I've got my phone all the way up. So just so you know, I don't know if that's an issue on my side or your side.
Okay, well, I guess we'll find out soon enough.
Okay. The reason I wrote the book is there are several good books out there already, excellent books on the Marian issues from a Protestant perspective. What I did not find is the issue addressed from the underlying assumptions that these beliefs are based on. And so I took a different tack and wanted to address the status of Mary. That really is the pinnacle. If there is a pinnacle of the book, that is it. The pinnacle issue is the status of Mary in the New Testament. How is she portrayed? How is she viewed by the New Testament writers? And how does that match up with what Rome says about her? And when we look at the New Testament, what we find is not a special status for Mary, but something very different. In fact, the differences between Mary of the New Testament and Mary of Roman Catholicism are about as stark as you can get.
Mm-hmm. And well, let me, before I even go into some of the more meaty questions involved in this really, some might call it a masterpiece of a book, one of the largest in-depth volumes from a Protestant perspective on Mary. The accusation will frequently come from Roman Catholics when they even hear about an evangelical addressing this issue is, why are you attacking Mary? Or why do you dislike Mary? What do you have against Mary? Or why do you hate Mary? Perhaps you could roll those all into one with a brief answer. Sure.
The fact is, I know of no Protestant who hates or even dislikes Mary. What we dislike, Chris, is the misrepresentation of Mary by the Roman Catholic Church. And what we find is there's an exalted status that not only dishonors Mary because it says things about her that are not true, but it also dishonors God and Jesus Christ because it detracts from their glory. Mm-hmm. So that is, I think, the crux of the issue here. It's not that there is a dislike. It's just that there is not a whole lot said about Mary. In fact, outside the New Testament, we don't know a whole lot about Mary. And even in the New Testament, we don't know a whole lot about Mary because there's just not that much that's said about her.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you were to make a statement that while our Lord Jesus Christ walked the earth, he never flew like a bird, you're not attacking Jesus Christ. You're merely stating historical and biblical fact about him.
We're just trying to get back to the heart of what the biblical teaching is. The apostolic teaching is of prime importance here, and we don't want to distort that.
Right. Well, most Roman Catholic and evangelical dialogue on the issue of Mary has centered around the four Marian dogmas, which include the Immaculate Conception, the bodily Assumption, Mary's perpetual virginity, and her position as Queen of Heaven. Your book, on the other hand, addresses the underlying assumptions that lead to these beliefs, namely the status of Mary as revealed in the New Testament writers. You just mentioned that a moment ago. Can you really give us a little bit about the difference between those two approaches?
Absolutely. When we compare the Mary of the New Testament to that of Roman Catholicism, what we find is a great disparity. For instance, in the New Testament, Mary weds as a virgin and then engages in normal marital relations with her husband after the birth of Jesus. This results in Jesus having biological brothers and sisters, and we have even the names of his brothers in the Gospels themselves. In Roman Catholicism, on the other hand, Mary is a perpetual virgin. In the New Testament, Mary is blessed, we're told, by virtue of her privilege to bear the Messiah. And one of the phrases that's used of her, that she uses of herself, is that all generations will call me blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that is true, because any generation can recognize that if the Messiah were to be born in my household, I would be blessed too. And so she is blessed in that sense. She was chosen to bear the Messiah.
They're reading more into that word. They're reading more into that word "blessed" than is really there.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right. It is a state of blessedness. It is a happiness. It is a joy.
And Jesus uses that word on the Sermon on the Mount for other folks other than Mary.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Mary is also in the New Testament presented as somebody who accepts the charge of God that she is going to bear the Messiah. She doesn't wrangle about it at all. She gives the only appropriate response, and that is, "Let it be done to me according to your word." In Roman Catholicism, that same statement, that same situation, ends up being that the world sort of hangs in the balance and waits for Mary's decision. And if she says yes, she's free to go about her life. In the meantime, if she says no, she's free to go about her life. But in the meantime, if she says no, the entire world falls into condemnation because she's not willing to bear the Messiah. So God sort of wrings his proverbial hands in waiting for Mary to say yes to this. So that you can see where the role of Mary in Roman Catholicism transgresses the role of Mary in the New Testament. In the New Testament, Mary fails to understand the mission of Jesus and even actively opposes it on occasion. In Roman Catholicism, she's always in harmony with Jesus' mission, never misunderstands it. These are just a few of the differences. Most Roman Catholics would explain these differences by saying that some of these beliefs developed over time, and of course they did, but illegitimately so. It's not like the case of the Trinity, where we have in later centuries definitions of it that we didn't have in the first century. Because in the first century we still had all the pieces. Everybody still believed in the Trinity. They just didn't define it in that same. They didn't make the type of declaration that came later. But we can put together those pieces and still come up with a Trinity. What we have instead, in the case of Mary, are statements that lie in direct contradiction to the Roman Catholic beliefs about Mary. So it's not just a matter of pulling pieces together and putting them in such a way that we see that the germ form was there, and of course there was a natural development later.
Well, one very interesting observation you make in your book is that anytime Jesus refers to Mary in the New Testament, he is always distancing himself from her, and in some cases actually rebukes her. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Let's start with Mark 3. Mark 3 tells us in verse 20, Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, and so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. In verse 21 it says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. So here we have a group of people identified as Jesus' family deciding that they're going to set out to take charge of him because they think he is insane. Now, a few verses later, we discover who this family is. In verse 31, they finally arrive, and it says, then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. So now we know that Mary is part of this family who heads out to silence Jesus because she thinks he is insane. It goes on to say, standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, And they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. Verse 33 says, Jesus says, who are my mother and my brothers? Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. And so what Jesus is doing here, in essence, is replacing his biological family for his spiritual family. This same tendency is found just a few chapters later in Mark chapter 6. In Mark 6, 1 through 6, we have the townspeople wondering just who Jesus is. And they ask, isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son? And the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, and by the way, here his brothers are named, aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. In verse 4, Jesus responds to that by saying, only in his hometown, now there's the people who are gathering around, the townspeople, among his relatives and in his own house is a prophet without honor. Now we have to ask the question, who are those who are his relatives? Who are those in his own house? If we take the people who are saying this, the townspeople, and Mary is there, his mother is Mary, it says, and his brothers are James, Joseph, Simon, Judas, his sisters are with us. If we take his relatives to mean his brothers, if we just grant that much to the Roman Catholic position, who is left in his house that he is dishonored by? Obviously, the only one that's left is his mother. And so even his own mother is included in those that Jesus says, do not honor him. Mm-hmm. We go into Luke chapter 2. We find the same kind of thing. Jesus is at the temple. He's 12 years old. He gets separated from the company that are traveling. They find him several days later in the temple. Verse 48 in Luke 2 says, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, son, why have you treated us like this? And you can imagine how worried Mary must have been here. I mean, this is the normal response of a mother. It's also the normal response of a mother who assumes she has a prerogative to ask this. Mm-hmm. Jesus answers in a strange way. Verse 49, why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Now, in this passage, Luke paints a picture of Mary that indicates not only that Mary did not understand Jesus' purpose and mission, that he had to be in his Father's house, and even opposed it to some degree by coercing him out, but more importantly, that Mary is in need of correction here, not only in the misdirection of her question, but also perhaps in her prerogative to ask it. And so we have, again, a picture of Jesus severing those biological ties and distancing himself from his mother. Now, the crux of this, I think, is in Luke 11. When we get to Luke 11, verses 27 and 28, we read that while Jesus is speaking, quote, a woman in the crowd called out, blessed is the mother who gave you birth and nursed you. Mm-hmm. Literally, blessed is the womb that bore you and the breast that nursed you. Now, I want to stop here a second because what are we told in Roman Catholicism regarding the honor given to Mary? Mm-hmm. We're told that it is an indirect honor that is really given to Jesus. We honor Jesus to the extent that we honor his mother. Since Jesus honored his mother, we would be remiss not to honor her, and the more we honor her, the more we honor Jesus. This is just what this woman was doing. If you think about it, she was saying, blessed is the mother who gave you birth and nursed you. She was doing that as sort of an indirect praise of Jesus. This is the perfect opportunity for Jesus to step in and say, amen, amen to that.
Yeah.
Praise be to my mother. And you have rightly honored her by your statement. What does he do instead? Instead he says, blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey it. Again, redirecting that praise, deflecting the praise from Mary to those who actually hear the word of God and obey it.
And that would include Mary, of course, correct?
That includes Mary, but not until later.
Mm-hmm.
She's still kind of teetering on the fence here about just what her role is. And I don't think she comes to grips with it until the end, when she's at the foot of the cross.
Mm-hmm. I think this would probably be a good time for us to take a break. If you'd like to join us on the air with a question for Eric Svendsen regarding Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, whether you agree with what he's saying, whether you radically oppose what he's saying, we look forward to hearing from you, perhaps even especially if you're Roman Catholic. I'd love to hear from you, but I'm not excluding any others. We would love to hear from you no matter what your religious background or lack thereof is. 631-321-WNYG. 631-321-WNYG. And if you feel more comfortable remaining anonymous, you may do so. 631-321-WNYG. Don't go away.
Have you or someone you know been injured due to an accident or medical malpractice? If so, call Buttafuoco & Associates at 1-800-669-HURT. Hi, my name is Kristen Buttafuoco. My father is Dan Buttafuoco of Buttafuoco & Associates, the personal injury lawyers. He's been serving the Christian community for over 20 years. Ever since I was young, I've had the opportunity to watch him in action. Over the years, I've seen him help countless people rebuild their lives after an accident or injury. I know that he gives each case individual attention. I know he and his staff take each case personally. I've seen him both laugh and cry along with his clients. It's hard work, but he loves doing it. So I can confidently say, we help accident victims rebuild their lives. Dad can help you too. Just call 1-800-669-HURT. 1-800-669-HURT and let my dad take care of you. He's good at that, I promise.
Today, the reliability of the Bible is constantly being denied by those touted in the media as the most brilliant and learned scholars during heavily publicized documentaries and broadcasts which attract audiences of millions. Rarely, if ever, is equal time or anything close to it given to a biblically sound Christian scholar of the caliber of Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries. Dr. White is a professor having taught Greek, systematic theology, and various topics in the field of apologetics. He has authored more than 20 books, including The King James Only Controversy, The Forgotten Trinity, The Potter's Freedom, and The God Who Justifies. He is an accomplished debater, having engaged in more than 60 moderated public debates with leading proponents of Roman Catholicism, liberal Protestantism, Islam, Oneness Pentecostalism, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mormonism. For information on any of Dr. White's upcoming debates and speaking engagements, to hear MP3s of past debates, and to order any of Dr. White's books, visit www.aomin.org. That's aomin.org. This promotion is sponsored by Dantona Industries in Wantagh, Long Island. For all your battery needs, call 1-800-DANTONA.
WNYG, the spirit of New York.
Welcome back. This is Chris Arns, and before I return to my guest, Eric Svendsen, on our subject, Who is My Mother?, the role and status of Mary in the New Testament and Roman Catholicism, I want to thank our good friends at Dantona Industries in Wantagh, Long Island, for returning to the Iron Sharpens Iron family of supporters and advertisers. And Sal Dantona, one of the owners of Dantona Industries, who is also a member of Lynbrook Baptist Church on Long Island and Nassau County's South Shore. He wants to invite you, in fact, the whole congregation wants to invite you to a free concert at Lynbrook Baptist Church featuring the Christian Septet, the King's Army. Septet meaning seven. 7 people in the group. There's 7 brothers, the Waldvogel brothers, and they are vocalists and musicians and will be providing old-time gospel favorites in addition to original contemporary songs of praise. That's Sunday night, May 18th at 6 o'clock. Admission is absolutely free, as I mentioned. A love offering will be taken. And if you like directions and information about this concert on Sunday, May 18th, the number is 516-599-9402. 516-599-9402. If you need directions and other details, you could also go to lynbrookbaptist.org on the internet. lynbrookbaptist.org. That's Lynbrook Baptist.org. They do not yet have information about the concert itself posted that I saw, but they do have directions and other details about the church itself. Once again, 516-599-9402 is the phone number. Eric, you were just talking about that very crucial passage in Luke 11, verses 27 and 28. What is the typical Roman Catholic apologist's response to those verses?
Well, there isn't really that great of a response. It's they tend to want to downplay the meaning of the word rather in this passage, but it does mean what it says. The English translations are fairly straightforward here, even in the Catholic Bibles. But rather, in other words, there's a deflection of praise from Mary to those who hear the Word of God and do it.
Now, moving on to the siblings of Jesus, the Roman Catholic Church obviously insists that Mary was not only a virgin at the birth of Christ, or even in his conception, of course, as we as evangelicals would 100% agree with, but they believe that she perpetually remained one after the birth of Christ throughout her entire marriage to Joseph, and they insist that therefore she did not have any other children. We read verses like you just read in the scriptures. We say, how can you possibly say that she did not have other children? And they will insist that those are not brothers, literal brothers, but close relatives or cousins. How do you respond to that?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what is said. No one denies that the New Testament speaks of the brothers and sisters of Jesus, including the passage I just read, plus Matthew 13, 55, and 56 says the same thing and names those brothers. The question is, how is that word to be taken? And the word there that's used there is autophos in the Greek. The feminine version is autophe. And what Catholic apologists will say at this point is that this is referring not to his biological siblings, but rather to some distant relatives or even close relatives that are undefined. And they'll go to the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, the Greek version of the Old Testament, and they will point to the relationship between Abraham and Lot, and the fact that they are called adelphos for each other, even though we know that Abraham was Lot's uncle. So how do we deal with this? The fact is, Chris, these words, adelphos, adelphe, occur over 360 times in the New Testament alone, most of which refer, by the way, to spiritual siblings. You're my brother in Christ, and that is the primary usage of it. But a full 90 of these, 90 instances, or 91 instances, refer to biological relationships. But not one of them bears the meaning close relative. Whenever it refers to a biological relationship, the meaning is always sibling. That is, one who shares at least one common parent with another. Now, it's important to note here that the New Testament does have designations for close relatives outside of siblings, if that is what they meant. For instance, the word sungenis, used in Luke 1:36 to refer to Elizabeth as the cousin of Mary. The word anepsios is another one. That occurs in Colossians 4:10 to refer to Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. There's another way, of course, of referring to one's close relatives, more of a Semitic way, that we find in Acts chapter 23, verse 16, where Paul's nephew is literally referred to as the son of Paul's sister. None of these, though, are called brothers. So it seems evident that the New Testament writers knew of ways to denote cousins or close relatives, if that is what they meant. The same is true, by the way, of all the Greek literature surrounding the New Testament. So far as we know, there's not even one instance of the word adelphos or adelphe used of a close relative outside of biological siblings. So the view that brother in the New Testament means close relative is completely unattested and should be, for that reason alone, rejected.
Now, what do you make of the Eastern Orthodox theory that, yes, these might indeed be the literal sons of Joseph from a previous marriage, that he was a widower?
Yes.
But they're not obviously the sons of Mary. How do you respond to that?
Once again, I address that in my book. The argument itself is based upon on inference upon inference upon inference. It is based on a theory, and as even a Roman Catholic observer, I think it was J.P. Meyer, who is a Roman Catholic scholar, observes that this view seems like every escape hatch possible is being pried open to escape the ramification that Jesus may have had brothers and sisters. There just is no support for it in the New Testament.
Now, why do you think that this idea of Mary's perpetual virginity, obviously I have to repeat, you and I believe one of the pillars of the Christian faith, one of the pillar teachings of the Christian faith is that Jesus was born of a virgin, that there was no sexual relation between Mary and Joseph prior to the conception of Christ and his birth. But why do the Catholics feel it so vital to insist that she remained one throughout her entire marriage to Joseph until she was either, according to them, assumed while alive or assumed after she perished.
Sure. Well, it has an awful lot to do with the development of this doctrine over the course of church history. And of course, once it becomes entrenched in Roman Catholic tradition, it's hard to pry it out. And so inevitably it must become an accepted Roman Catholic belief. The other part of that is the reason it developed that way, I believe, is because of the Gnostic influences of some of those in the early church who were who began to formulate this doctrine. The early church was heavily influenced by that sort of thing, where they viewed, for instance, sexual relations as somewhat of a sin. It's kind of a minor sin if you're married, but it's one nevertheless. And the reason we know that is because the way that they describe sexual relations, if Mary had engaged in sexual relations with her husband, then she would have engaged in the stain of carnal commerce. Now that is a loaded phrase. The stain of carnal commerce automatically means that if you do it, then you're sort of a lesser being for it. And the other part of that, Chris, is I think there is a tendency to parallel Jesus with Mary. Mm-hmm. So that, for instance, Jesus is born sinless, and so Mary becomes to the point where she's born sinless. Jesus lives a sinless life. Mary lives a sinless life in Roman Catholicism. Jesus was a virgin all his life. Mary, then, of course, is a virgin all her life. Jesus, at the end of his life, is assumed bodily into heaven, as is Mary. Jesus is exalted to the right hand of God. Mary herself becomes exalted as Queen of Heaven. And so I think it's an attempt to add that it's driven by that parallelism, if you will.
We do have an internet listener, Paul in Illinois. Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron, Paul.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Dr. Svendsen.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine, loud and clear.
Okay, I just wanted to thank you for your excellent book. I got it here in my hands, who is my mother. You did a wonderful job on this, and I've also listened to the debate that you did just prior to that book being released with Jerry Matitix.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I was wondering, with all the publicity that Tim Staples has been getting regarding his work on Mariology, do you think there's any opportunity for you to debate him?
I haven't heard Tim Staples in the debate arena for quite a while now. In fact, I thought he had fallen off the face of the earth. Maybe
he's with Catholic Answers now.
But there's nothing in the works at this point, anyway.
Yeah, last I heard, he was with Catholic Answers because I had actually approached him to debate Dr. White about a year ago, and Catholic Answers insisted that he have more time with Catholic Answers before he ventured out in the debating arena again.
Yeah, he didn't fare very well against James during that debate.
You mean the one prior to his going to Catholic Answers, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, that was in the papacy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, they actually had two of them. One was on Sola Scriptura.
Okay. Well,
and the other thing is, Dr. Svendsen, I've got your previous book, Evangelical Answers, and I'd highly recommend that one as well. It really gives some insights into the dishonest approach that many of the Roman Catholic apologists have been using.
Thank you very much. That was the first book that I published on the Roman Catholic issues, and by the way, it covers a much broader spectrum of Roman Catholic beliefs than of course the book on Mary does.
By the way, Paul, have you ever won one of our genuine leather Bibles?
I'm on the list.
Okay, great. Well,
thanks, guys.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. It's always great to hear our internet listeners from all over the United States and sometimes from other parts of the world. Amazing about what a miracle the internet is in our day. We have to go to a break right now. If you'd like to join us on the air with a question for Eric Svendsen regarding the Mother of Jesus Christ, whether you agree with what he is saying or whether you radically oppose what he is saying, or you're just not certain, we'd love to hear from you at 631-321-WNYG, 631-321-WNYG, and you may remain anonymous if it makes you feel more comfortable, and we'll be right back. Today, the reliability of the Bible is constantly being denied by those touted in the media as the most brilliant and learned scholars during heavily publicized documentaries and broadcasts which attract audiences of millions. Rarely, if ever, is equal time or anything close to it given to a biblically sound Christian scholar of the caliber of Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries. Dr. White is a professor having taught Greek, systematic theology, and various topics in the field of apologetics. He has authored more than 20 books, including The King James Only Controversy, The Forgotten Trinity, The Potter's Freedom, and The God Who Justifies. He is an accomplished debater, having engaged in more than 60 moderated public debates with leading proponents of Roman Catholicism, liberal Protestantism, Islam, Oneness Pentecostalism, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mormonism. For information on any of Dr. White's upcoming debates and speaking engagements, to hear MP3s of past debates, and to order any of Dr. White's books, visit www.aomin.org. That's aomin.org. This promotion is sponsored by Dantona Industries in Wantagh, Long Island. For all your battery needs, call 1-800-DANTONA.
Some people grasp the concept that switching your dial to our station is a significant decision.
This is the most important thing that I've ever done.
You are locked into WNYG, the spirit of New York.
The New American Standard Bible has been widely embraced as the most literally accurate English translation from the original languages. Millions of people, students, scholars, pastors, missionaries, and laypersons alike, trust the NASB, learning from it and applying it to the challenges of their everyday lives. Discover what the original text says word for word. The New American Standard Bible has been updated, increasing clarity and readability. Vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structure were carefully reviewed for greater understanding and smoother reading. In perfecting the updated NASB, more than 20 translators spent nearly 3 years scrutinizing the NASB in order to modernize it and maintain it in accordance with the most recent research on the oldest and best manuscripts. Thus, some passages have been updated for even greater fidelity to the original manuscripts. Trust, discover, and enjoy the NASB for yourself today. For more details on the most literal Bible translation that is now more readable, visit www.nasbible.com. That's nasbible.com. Welcome back. This is Chris Arns, and if you've just tuned us in, our guest today is Eric Svendsen, and we are discussing his groundbreaking 334-page work, Who is My Mother? The Role and Status of Mary in the New Testament and Roman Catholicism. Going back to that paradox of the Roman Catholic view of marital sexual relations as carnal commerce, is that the way you phrased it?
The stain of carnal commerce.
The stain of carnal commerce. It is ironic because...
Where that phrase comes from. I've got it down, but I can't remember just where that comes from.
Well, the irony is that Roman Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church has always encouraged married couples to have as many children as they could possibly have.
Yeah, try walking that tightrope.
And in fact, you can. I don't even think that you could be married in the Roman Catholic Church if even for a physical disability you're unable to have marital relations. Isn't that true?
You're addressing an area of canon law that I'm not familiar with.
Okay, I just remember hearing that growing up in the Catholic Church, but I don't know if that was ever a dogma or discipline or what have you. But anyway, we were talking about the alleged perpetual virginity of Mary, the mother of Jesus, which is such a vital and central dogma about her taught in Roman Catholicism. Most conservative Roman Catholics believe that Mary took a vow of virginity as evidenced by her response to the angel in Luke 1:34. How can this be, since I do not know a man? Now, is this eisegesis? Or is this a proper reading of that passage?
Well, even Roman Catholic scholars these days see this as an example of eisegesis. This is not something that is held by, the Raymond Browns and the Joseph Fitzmyers and all the other the Mackenzies, all the other major Roman Catholic scholars. This is something that it was held on, glommed onto in earlier years, but it's still held by Roman Catholic apologists. According to most of those apologists, that statement, just as you said, indicates she had taken a prior vow of virginity, and they interpret it as something like, how can this be, or how can this happen, since I am by vocation a virgin? In other words, this is my calling, this is what I do. This is one of those instances which illustrates, as you've already alluded to, Chris, the basic maxim of hermeneutics that states, if the plain sense makes good sense, seek no other sense, lest it result in nonsense. That's just what this does. First of all, Mary does not say, how can this be since I will not know a man, which is what would be required to conclude that Mary had taken a vow of lifelong virginity. Instead, she says, she uses the present tense, how can this be since I am not knowing a man? So it's the present tense, not the future, that's used here. It's the present situation, not the future, that is in mind here. The present tense makes good sense because Mary can't fathom how she's going to become pregnant right now since she's not currently having sexual relations with Joseph. Now, how do we know that? Well, because the text goes on to tell us that Mary hurried after this vision of the angel. She hurried to see her relative Elizabeth, and by the time she gets there, Elizabeth is able to say, blessed are you and blessed is the fruit of your womb. So she became pregnant during that short period between the angelic visit and the time she hurried down to see her cousin. And so if Mary asks her question to the angel under the assumption that the angel is referring to the immediate future, well, then she turns out to be right in that assumption because she does, in fact, conceive almost immediately after the angel leaves. Now, aside from all that, the Roman Catholic notion of a young Jewish girl taking a vow of virginity while planning her own wedding is quite frankly, the stuff of which myths are made. There was no such thing as a married virgin in Jewish culture that day. In fact, Jewish culture looked to the bearing of children as a great blessing, and in fact considered childlessness a disgrace for a married woman. That's why Elizabeth is able to say in Luke 1:25 that God has taken away my disgrace by giving me a son. You can also look at the Old Testament cases of Rachel and Sarah and Hannah, all of whom were disgraced by not having children. Now, this is the point at which there are incredible inconsistencies on this issue, because most of them unwittingly, most of the Roman Catholic apologists who hold this unwittingly assert two conflicting premises here, not even realizing there is a conflict. On the one hand, they assert that the statement by Mary proves she had already taken a vow of virginity before the angel's visit. When we ask why a Jewish girl would take a vow of virginity while she's planning a wedding, their answer is, well, so that she could have a protectorate for her child, so that Joseph could protect them from harm, and ends up that Joseph does protect them and takes them down to Egypt and then brings them back. Well, the problem is, how did Mary know she was going to have a child? And so, again, we go back into a circle. Why did she get married if she was going to remain a virgin? This is something that is an historical novum. It's not something that we find in the literature.
I don't want to belabor this perpetual virginity issue, but one of the other things that the Roman Catholic apologists add to their arsenal is that not only did all of the fathers and every Christian worthy of note throughout the centuries of Christendom believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, but even the 16th century reformers all unanimously believed that this was true. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that is a common claim. I've got some articles actually on my website that I would refer you to, refer your audience to, by James Swan. I believe you've had him on your program.
Oh, yeah, James Swan is the creator of the Iron Sharpens Iron website.
Aha. That I did not know.
Yes.
So I'm giving him a plug here. He has some articles on my website dealing with Luther's view, his changing view of Mary. It is evident by his conclusions that there was an evolution in Luther's thinking about this. Calvin, on the other hand, I think is more easily nailed down. Calvin never comes out and says, I believe in this. In fact, he says things that would contradict it. In his Harmony of the Gospels, for instance, he says this: the conjecture, when he gets to this passage about Mary's words, and he sifts through the arguments about the Roman Catholics who hold that this is a vow of virginity, he says the conjecture which some have drawn from these words that she had formed a vow of perpetual virginity as unfounded and altogether absurd. She would in that case have committed treachery by allowing herself to be united to a husband and would have poured contempt on the holy covenant of marriage, which could not have been done without mockery of God. Now he says 3 things occur if a young Jewish girl decides she's going to take a vow of virginity and get married. 3 things. One is she commits treachery. The other is she pours contempt on the holy covenant of marriage. And the third thing is she mocks God. Now, if that's the case for somebody who's planning to do that, those 3 things apply all the more to somebody who actually does it. And so if Mary ends up going into this relationship and never having normal sexual relations with Joseph, maintains this status of virginity throughout her married life, then she's subject to these same criticisms of Calvin. I don't think Calvin was so dull as not to catch that. So I think this not only talks about, he's not only speaking here about the vow of virginity, but also the very concept of Mary remaining a perpetual virgin throughout her married years.
And we don't view the reformers as inerrant anyway.
That's the other thing.
And very, very quickly, don't spend too much time on this, because it is kind of a strange view that I had never heard anybody say until Jerry Maddox brought it up during his debate with you. He would insist that Protestants cannot rightly say we believe in the virgin birth, because Jerry believes, and I'm not even sure this is a typical Catholic view, excuse the graphic description, but Jerry believes, at least he did at the time of your debate, that Mary's hymen remained intact after giving birth to Jesus as a sign that she would remain perpetually a virgin, and this was a miraculous type of thing where there was nothing physically disturbed. But isn't that somewhat absurd? I mean, even if a young girl, through an accident or through surgery, has been physically damaged in that sense, she would still be considered a virgin, wouldn't she, if she had never had sex?
Yeah, he did bring that argument up, and unfortunately, he's confusing, as a lot of Roman Catholic colleges do, confusing virginity with the breaking of a hymen. Mm-hmm. And as you rightly point out, let's suppose a young girl is climbing a tree mm-hmm. and falls and impales herself. Mm-hmm. Does that mean she has lost her virginity? I mean, that's what is implied by that kind of argument. And the answer is, of course not. That's just ridiculous. What virginity means in the New Testament is the absence of sexual relations. It has mm-hmm. nothing to do with an injury to the hymen. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, that's the argument he brought up, and of course it's an untenable one.
Have you ever heard anybody even utter that argument other than Jerry?
No, I haven't heard. Yeah, well, yes, it actually is the official line of the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
She remained a virgin in partu. In partu is Latin for during her virginity, or during her birth, rather. Okay. So in partu and post partu. So I'm not even sure post partu is the correct phrase for that, but it's after she gave birth. So yes, the official line is, and it comes straight from Gnostic sources, by the way, is that Mary felt no pain and there was no damage to her hymen.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that would be.
If you read some of the early Gnostic sources on this, they say about the same thing, that Jesus just sort of slid through the birth canal, and the reason is because he wasn't really a man. Mm-hmm. And Irenaeus has a lot to say about that. So is Tertullian.
Well, you just brought up, you said that the Catholic teaching is that she had no pain. Then how could she be, as they insist, Mary, and how could the woman in Revelation 12, with the moon under her feet and crown of the 12 stars on her head, be Mary when doesn't she experience pain in giving birth in that text?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, if you look at at Revelation 12, there's this vision of a woman with clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, 12 stars on her head, and Roman Catholics, the Roman Catholic instinct at that point is to identify her as Mary. Now that's exacerbated a little bit by the text itself that tells us that she bears a child, and that child rules with an iron scepter, and that is clearly the Messiah that's being spoken of there. And so Roman Catholics view this woman in Revelation 12 as Mary. But the other thing it says is that she's clothed with the sun, mm-hmm. that she's standing on the moon. A crown of 12 stars is on her head. And so they say, aha, it's not only Mary, but it's Mary in her exalted state. So this is proof that she is now Queen of Heaven and Mother over the Church. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is just what you brought up, Chris, is that in verse 1, we've got the word birth pains that this woman actually undergoes, and in verse 2 as well. Now, if this is Mary, then the Roman Catholics are in a bit of a dilemma here. Because, as you mentioned, they believe that Mary did not experience birth pains when she gave birth to Jesus. They believe that since Mary was conceived without original sin, she escaped the normal consequences of the pain of childbearing.
Yeah, that was a discipline of God to Eve in the garden because of the sin that took place.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we have to go to a break right now, but this will be your last opportunity to call in if you have a question for Eric at 631-321-WNYG, 631-321-WNYG. Don't go away.
Are you, a loved one, a friend, or someone you know at church going through a tough financial time because of an injury on the job? In need of wise counsel, bills piling up, seemingly nowhere to turn? What will you do? Where will you turn? You have a champion in Dan Buttafuoco.
In my practice, we don't take money from our clients. We only work on a contingency fee, which means we don't get paid unless we win. No attorney should ever ask you for money for expenses, and yet I know that it's done in this business. We don't do it, but that's proof that we believe in the case.
Contact the law offices of Dan Buttafuoco at 1-800-NOW-HURT. Employers have a battery of lawyers to protect their interests. Dan Buttafuoco will fight for your interests and won't charge you a dime until they've won the damages you deserve. Start by calling the law offices of Dan Buttafuoco at 1-800-NOW-HURT. That's 1-800-NOW-HURT.
WNYG, the spirit of New York.
Welcome back. This is Chris Arns, and we're interviewing Eric Svendsen on his book, Who is My Mother? The Role and Status of Mary in the New Testament in Roman Catholicism. Now, even a more serious departure from scriptural truth and the exclusive claims of Jesus Christ is the teaching that Mary is a co-redemptress. If you could explain where they get this type of where they get any backing for that type of a belief.
That comes from Luke chapter 1, which a lot of the Marian dogmas do, by the way. Luke chapter 1, verse 38. This is Mary's response to the angel once it's been announced to her that she will bear the Messiah. She says, I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. Now, Roman Catholic apologists see the words of Mary here as a fiat on her part. That is a decision to become the mother of Jesus and thereby share in his redemptive work. According to that view, the fate, as I said before, the fate of all mankind sort of hangs in the balance here and rests with Mary. She's free to choose one way or the other. The entire universe, including God himself, wrings his hands in anticipation of what she might decide. Now, what this ends up being, Chris, is sort of a case of special pleading with regard to Mary. In the first place, Mary is not asked anything in this passage, and I think I mentioned that at the beginning of the broadcast. She's instead told she will bear the Messiah. It's not as though God or an angel or anyone else for that matter is waiting for Mary's decision. This is going to happen. It's a passive act. Mary doesn't have to do anything. If she doesn't want to, I mean, the only alternative there is to get an abortion, and she's not going to do that, of course, because then she's murdering the Messiah. And now, if we're positing a fiat on Mary's part, we have to ask just why that same rationale is not also applied to Joseph's decision, for instance, to hand Mary a certificate of divorce. In other words, if he had decided to hand her a certificate of divorce, she clearly would have been accused of adultery. She probably would have been stoned to death, and Joseph sort of rescues her from that by staying with her based on what the angel tells him. The other thing is Paul's decision to take the gospel to the Gentiles. Was that really something he had a choice in the matter to do? What we find is that when God wants somebody to do something, they'll either accept. If they don't, he applies the necessary pressure to get them to accept. I mean, just witness Jonah and what happened to him when he didn't want to go preach to the Ninevites. He went into the belly of the fish for 3 days, and then he was convinced that he ought to go. We see the example of Moses, who did not want to go to Pharaoh and speak to him. He did not want to speak to the Israelites, and he kept making excuses that he's not a good speaker. And so God finally says, okay, then let Aaron be the spokesperson, but you're still going. Even in the matter of Pharaoh himself, we're told in Romans chapter 9 that God actually hardens his heart in order to accomplish his will through him. So nobody thwarts the purpose of God. Nobody thwarts the plan of God. It's clear that if Mary had refused in some way, God simply would have applied the necessary pressure to get his will done, or he would have chosen somebody else. So the world does not hang in the balance waiting for Mary's decision here.
Now, this office of co-redemptress applied to Mary has never been yet dogmatized, correct?
It has not.
Can you understand, I haven't yet been able to understand, why is it that there seems to be a unanimous belief in this amongst conservative Roman Catholics, but there is hesitancy upon many of them, other than perhaps your more strict traditionalists, to have this defined as a dogma. Why would there be any opposition to it if you believe in it?
Well, I think the opposition stems from what is known as the spirit of Vatican II, which is making inroads into talking with other denominations, such as the Lutheran discussion that went on a number of years ago over the issue of justification, and to come to some kind of agreement. And they're finding that it's increasingly difficult to do that with Protestant groups who do not recognize Mary's status in that regard, and they see this as a great obstacle. I think that's probably the primary motivator. My feeling is it will eventually be accepted, but it will be accepted in a very subtle form, which is really a lot of the Marian dogmas were redefined at Vatican II and represented in a subtle form, including a lot of the other dogmas that have nothing to do with Mary, such as extra ecclesiam nobis salus, outside the church no salvation. They've had to revise that one as well to make inroads into these ecumenical efforts.
Yes, which is why many traditionalist Catholics and, of course, sedevacantist reject Vatican II entirely.
That's exactly right.
And the modern Catholic catechism. I want to give our listeners good news who have been enjoying this, or at least been interested in what has been discussed, even if you disagree. Because we ran out of time so quickly, Eric has agreed to be our guest again on Monday to continue this conversation, to bring up such things as the Immaculate Conception, to bring up such things as do Roman Catholics worship Mary in spite of their insistence that they do not, and other issues that we did not have time to address. Eric, I would like you to at least address as briefly as you can, and we can pick up a continuance of this question when we return on Monday if you'd like. But the obvious question that is brought up by Roman Catholic apologists and defenders of their faith is Luke 1:28, the angel's greeting Mary with the phrase, "Hail Mary, full of grace." How does that connected with Immaculate Conception?
That is the basis for it, of course. The Hail Mary, full of grace is the way that older Roman Catholic translations, as the Douay Rheims puts it. That's based again on the Latin Vulgate. Modern Roman Catholic versions do not have it that way. They instead say, "Oh, highly favored one." Now, the implication for full of grace in the Roman Catholic mind is that she must have been born without original sin. Now, that is a convoluted argument. We can get into that. It's going to take me more than the 2 or 3 minutes that we have left today to do that. Maybe we can pick up on that on Monday.
Sure.
That is the beginnings of it.
Well, I hope that whet your appetite to return to us on Monday. And over the weekend, I urge you to write questions down for Eric, especially if you disagree with what he's been saying, especially if you're Roman Catholic or perhaps Eastern Orthodox. And we would love to hear from you next or this coming Monday at 631-321-WNYG. Make sure you tell your family, friends, and loved ones also about that. And have them listen to the free downloadable MP3 of today's broadcast, which will be available sometime this evening at sharpens.org, sharpens.org. Eric, if you could give your contact information for our listeners.
You can go to my website, www.ntrmin, that's New Testament Research Ministries, ntrmin.org.
Great. And I want to also remind our listeners about the King's Army concert at Lynbrook Baptist Church, Sunday night, May 18th, 6 o'clock. Admission is absolutely free, and a love offering will be taken. That's the King's Army, which is a septet of vocalists and musicians providing old-time gospel favorites and original contemporary songs of praise. 516-599-9402, or visit lynbrookbaptist.org, lynbrookbaptist.org. Thank you so much, Eric, for being our guest. We look forward to hearing you again on Monday, and I thank all of you who listened, and I want to remind you to remember for the rest of your lives that Jesus Christ is a far, far greater Savior than you are a sinner. Have a blessed, safe, and happy weekend.
Preceding program brought to you in part by Buttafuoco and Associates.
The preceding broadcast was a paid program. The views expressed on the show are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of WNYG.
Today's Christian hits, music and ministry. The Spirit of New York at 1440 WNYG Babylon.